Okay, so we have our snowman pretty much complete at this point. You could take time to add more accessories like a pipe or whatever else you wanted to, and please do. That would make it more interesting. We're going to leave it simple just for the sake of time. Okay, so the next part is to rig this snowman into something that we can animate. Now, in a big production, they would use an armature, or the rig would be called an armature, which would be a skeleton made out of bones, and there'd be all kinds of selectors, and it'd be pretty complex. Since this is a beginning project meant for people who are relatively new in Blender, we're going to keep it very simple. So we're going to use what's called a parental rig, and what that means is that we're going to rely on a parent-child relationship between the various objects in our scene. So what that means is, in short, a parent-child relationship in this software and most other software that uses that terminology basically means that the child object can move around on their own and do whatever they want, but when the parent object does something, the child object has to do that as well. And so what that means is we're going to basically make every piece of this head stick to the head and do whatever the head says. Now we'll be able to still move those objects on their own, but whenever we turn the head or rotate the head, the other objects have to go with it, okay? And then we're going to set it up a certain way so that each of these objects is going to keep its relationship to the head so that they continue to stick onto the head where we need them to stay. Okay, so let's get started on that. It sounds a little more complex than it really is. So the first thing we have to do is select all the objects on the head. So remember, to select more than one object, we can select the hat with a left click. It turns yellow. We're going to hold down the shift key, and then we're just going to left click the other objects on the head. And it doesn't matter what order we select them in. Now, the last object we have to select is the head itself. So if we left click the head now by holding the shift key down as well, we'll see that all the objects on the head are orange and the head itself is yellow. And what that means is that this, and I think I touched on it a little bit earlier, the head is the last object selected of this group, and that makes it the active object. And we need the head to be the active object because that's the one we want to be the parent of all these other objects. So once we have the head selected last and it's yellow, if we hit Control and P at the same time, we'll get this menu. And it basically says set parent to, and we want the parent of all those facial and hat objects to be the head object, but we want them to keep their transformations, which means we want them to keep their place on the head in relationship to the head. So it's this second option right here, object keep transform. If we simply left click it, then we can test it out. So we can test it out by just clicking the head. No other objects are selected other than the head. And then if we give ourselves a little bit of room to rotate over here, we can hit RZ. And then you can see as we move the head around, all the objects not only move with the head, but they basically stay in their position in relationship to the head, which is what we need. It wouldn't do us any good if we rotated the head and then the objects got all messed up. Okay, I'm going to left click, and then I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that to put the head back where it goes. Okay? All right, so let's try it again. This time we're going to do the body. So we're going to select this arm with a left click. Then we're going to hold down the shift key, and we can select all these pieces of coal down the middle. And then this other arm. And then the body, remember, has to be last. So we'll click it, and we're holding the shift key down. And we can tell that the body is the last object selected because it's yellow while all the other objects are orange. And that means, of course, as I'm saying over and over again, for a good reason, this yellow object, the last one we selected, is now the active object. And that's what we need. So if we hit Control P again, Control and P at the same time, we'll get this menu. And of course, we want to hit the second selection, Object Keep Transform. So let's click it. Okay, we can test it by left-clicking the body. It's the only object selected. And then again, we're going to rotate it on the Z. RZ. And look, all the objects stay where they're supposed to and rotate with the body. All right, I'm going to left click. We're going to hit Control Z to undo that operation. Okay, so we're almost there with this part. It's pretty easy to do. It's more complex to say than it is to do. All right, so let's hit Alt A so nothing is selected. Remember, most of the time we want to make sure nothing else is selected when we add a new object. In this case, we're going to hit Shift A to add a new object, and the object we're going to add is down here. It's a new one for us in this project. It's called an empty, and we're going to pick the first option, plane axis. Okay, now it's down here, and it's kind of buried in the snow, and you can't really see it. So if we hit GZ, we can bring it up, and now you can start to see it. It's kind of basically looks like a big plus sign if we were to look from the top. And you can see it has an origin point in the middle, and then these lines that come out. Now, none of this will be visible in our render. You just can't see an empty. An empty is basically a coordinate in 3D space that we can now lock stuff to or use as a guide for various things. So if we parent stuff to this object, then we can move this object, which you can't see, but it'll actually move the entire object. And so let's do that. First thing we're going to do is we're going to select the head. Then we're going to hold down the Shift key, select the body, and then finally we're going to select the lowest snowball. Okay, and then last, we have to, you might want to tip it up like that so we can see the empty in the back so we don't select the ground by accident. And then let's hold down the Shift key, of course, and then left click the empty. Now, as before, the 3 snowballs are orange outline, and then the empty is yellow, so it's the active object, which is what we want. Now, we didn't have to pick any of these other objects because they're already parented to these snowballs. So now we're parenting the snowballs to this empty. So with that empty, the last object selected as the active object, we can now hit Control and P at the same time, and we'll get this set parent to, and then we're going to pick the same one, object, keep transform. All right, I'm going to back out here just a little bit. Now if we just select just the, well, I selected the ground, so just try again, and now I have the object. So let's test it out. If we hit GY, then we notice that the entire snowman now will follow this empty. I'm going to hit Control Z just to put the snowman back where it was by undoing. And then we can even go RZ, and we can make our snowman twirl around. Okay, and then of course left click to end that, and then Control Z to put it back where he was by undoing. All right, cool. So that basically concludes the rigging. Probably was way more painless than you might have thought it was going to be. And again, this is a beginner's tutorial, so we're not going to go into a massive rig. Although if you're into characters and stuff, that should be a pretty good part of your studies because it really does take a while to figure that out. I may have some tutorials on that coming up down the road, but for now, we're going to keep it real simple. All right, so that's the end of this segment, and I will see you in the next one. Okay, so we're ready for the animation portion here. Down here along the bottom is our timeline. You've probably seen it down there. You may have already known what it was. Anyways, we're going to expand it slightly up into this other window by hovering over the border. We're going to get the double arrow icon. We're going to left click and drag it up just a little bit. We don't need to see very much of it. Okay, so the timeline is organized from frame 1 to frame 250. By default, it's set to 250 frames. If we look right here in the upper right corner of this editor, which this is an editor, and you can always find it in the icons in your upper left of any window you have open, you can see that we were starting at frame 1 and ending at 250. Now we can set this to whatever we want. If you wanted a longer animation, you can change that. You can also come right up in here in our control panel, the one under the render settings, the one that looks like a little printer, the output properties. If we left click that, we'll get this window here. This tells us our resolution of what's going to be rendered and all that kind of stuff. But it also says right here, frame start 1, frame end 250. Now that's where we can change the number of frames. And right now while we're in here, frame rate is something we're going to change. We're going to change it from 24 frames per second to 30 frames per second. If we just click on it, we'll get this window, and let's pick 30. So while we're here, we're going to change that. We don't need anything else here for now. I just wanted to point out you could change the number of frames here or here in case you wanted to make a longer video. Okay, so by default, it's 250 frames. Let's get going. The only other important things we need to know about is this button right here is the play button. That'll play our video. And then this one right here will take us back to the beginning of the video. Okay, so animation works by telling our computer where we want an object to be on a particular frame. And then we can also then control what it's doing on that frame or in between those frames. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take this snow person and put him where we want him to be on the first frame. So with the empty selected, which it should still be, if not, just click it. We're going to use our G commands. So we're going to use G, X. We're going to move him over here to the side. We're going to go G, Y to move him forwards and backwards. We're going to take him back here in the back. Let's go GX again, GX, and we'll drag him right over here. And that looks like a good place for the snow person to be in the beginning of the video. Now we want to rotate him on the Z, so GZ, and, oh, sorry, that was not a rotation, GRZ. I grabbed him and put him down there, sorry about that. And you can control Z to undo that if you followed me. All right, so sorry about the mistake. All right, so here's where he's going to start on frame 1. So the scrubber is at frame 1. The snowman's where we want him on frame 1. So now we need to put a keyframe there that tells the computer this is where he's definitely supposed to be on frame 1. So if we hover anywhere in the camera view and we hit I, that'll get us the insert keyframe menu. We want to go down to the one that says location rotation. By the way, we're only going to use this one for this entire project. So it's always going to be location rotation. Okay. And then now it put a golden diamond right on there, letting us know that there's a keyframe for the selected object, which is the empty. Okay. So now we got to figure out where he's going to go or what he's going to do. So I think that he's going to come over here and go past center and make a turn right here, and then he's going to come up here and be off center in the front of our foreground. So the first thing we have to figure out is how long would it take him to get from where he is now over to, say, right about here. I estimate it'd probably be about 3 seconds, maybe. 3 seconds is probably a good start. So let's give it a try. I need to move this scrubber to 90 seconds. And then we can move our snow person where we want him to be on that frame at frame 90. Now, we're also going to want a body turn, excuse me, slightly in between here. So let's back it off to, say, 60. And we'll move him a little over halfway. So let's hit GX. We'll put him, say, right here. And then let's bring him forward just a little bit with GY. Okay, and now let's give him a keyframe at frame 60, I, location rotation, and then let's move it forward to 90, where he's going to end up right over here, and let's move him over there. So let's hit GX and bring him right over here, and then GY to move him forward like this. Somewhere right about in here is where we want him to be, maybe a little further over. X, we'll bring him over here like that. And then the reason we put that other keyframe in back here is because between here and here, we want his body to turn slightly. So let's hit RZ to turn his body kind of where we're going. Something like that. He can look kind of right at us. Okay, and let's hit I, location rotation. All right, now if we just left click and hover over the blue part of this scrubber, we can take him back to the beginning. So let's start at the beginning, and we can just move it manually at whatever speed we want, which is the beauty of using this method. And then right as he hits this keyframe, he begins to turn his body towards us. And he kind of slides in looking, if you look at it. You won't really see it as much when the video is playing. Okay, so now here he is. And right now what we're doing is we're programming where we want the whole entire body to be in chunks, and then we'll go back and change the head around in the body. Okay, so the next place that he's going to be is right up here in the front, off center, at around frame 150. But like we did last time, we're going to probably take it back to 130, and we're going to put him somewhere in between here and his final stopping place, which will be right about here. So let's move him there. GY. Let's move him forward just a little bit. Then we can hit GX to move him over here just a little bit, like so. All right, and then let's hit a keyframe. So I, location, rotation. Okay, and then we'll move him to his final position. We have to move the scrubber to 150, which is where we want him to be at the end when he stops. And then we're going to move him to that position. So GY, we'll move him forward just a little bit. And then GX to move him slightly off center, something like that. And then we're going to hit I to insert a keyframe on location, rotation. Okay, so if we scrub this back, there he goes. He comes around the corner. Okay, so in his head and body are looking kind of weird right there. They're going to need to turn as well, but we'll do that here in just a minute. Okay, so somewhere in here, he's going to want to turn, he's right here. We're going to turn his head and body towards the, first his head. So I'm going to go a little bit back like so, maybe to 80, 82, somewhere around there, probably 80. And then we're going to grab his head and we're going to leave a keyframe. I, location, rotation. Then as we move into this position, just as he makes the turn, somewhere around right there, we want him to look in the direction he's going to travel. So we're going to hit RZ and we're going to turn his head this way, like so. And then we're going to leave a keyframe, I, location, rotation. Then we're going to move forward, and as we see, he's still looking kind of in the right direction as he comes up to the final position. Let's leave a keyframe right about where the other keyframe is, maybe 130. And then let's turn his head slightly towards us. RZ first to turn his head kind of towards us. And then let's hit I, location, and rotation. And then let's bring it to the stopping point at 150. And then let's turn his head just a little bit more towards us. RZ, we'll turn his head just a little towards us. We want his carrot to still be pointing slightly off to the side. We don't want to look directly at it. And then let's hit I for a location, rotation keyframe. All right, let's see how that looks. He comes around. His body needs to turn as well. So let's do the keyframes for his body. So we get here. He starts to turn his head. Let's leave a keyframe for his body right here. Here. And for the lower snowball as well, by shift left clicking, we can leave a keyframe for I, location, rotation. And then we'll move forward here to this other place where he kind of is in the middle. And then let's RZ. Oh, I'm sorry. When you try to do stuff down in here, it won't let you do what you want. You have to always be up in this window here. So sorry about that. Let's go RZ and turn this stuff kind of towards the direction he's traveling. And then we hit I to leave a location, rotation keyframe. And then we move forward into this thing here. And he stops at 150. And his body now needs to rotate again. RZ to look more towards us. Something like that. And we can call that good. And we'll hit I for location, rotation. All right, let's play the whole movie by hitting this thing that takes us right back to the beginning. Hit play. Here he comes. He makes a turn. And now he stops.